Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the God Squad Pod. Tonight, we have a very special guest whose name is not December Rose because she's a regular. And Matt, if you want to bring up the graphic real quick for our guest. So Mason Mennenga, the internet's crass youth pastor, is a guy I've been following on social media for a few years now. He is absolutely hilarious, particularly when it comes to pushing back against what I call the fundamentalist fuckwittery. I don't know what Mason may call it, but I see it all the time. So let's let's bring Mason from backstage to the front of the stage into the light. Welcome, Mason. And let's see, he's muted. Okay,
hello. Sorry about that.
Hello, there he is.
I feel like I'm now in the light. You all have shown me the light, and here I am going towards it. I've been told my whole life, if you start seeing the light, don't go to it. Don't go to it, especially if I'm in a medical setting.
That's right. Yeah. So Mason, like myself, is trained at a UCC seminary. No, works at a UCC seminary.
I guess trained too. I did go to that seminary as well. I did get another master's there. So technically.
Oh, okay. Okay. So multiple master's degrees, a master in divinity and a master in theology. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. See, he's probably forgot more about theology than I have ever known. So I'm just going to throw that out there because he's been in it and doing it for longer. And then, of course, my co-host is always December Rose. Say hi, December Rose.
Hey, y'all. What's up? Welcome back to another week of the God Squad. I am very excited about our special guest. And give us the correct pronunciation of your last name. I want to make sure I get it right. Because my culture would have me say Mennenga, but that might not be Mennenga. It might be Mennenga. It could be, what is the pronunciation of your last name?
So that is the most common mispronunciation. I've been told my whole life that it's Mennenga. So, but I've only been around for 30 years. There's an entire lifetime still where I could just start saying Mennenga now, and that's just how it should be. So we could go with that if we want. I mean, I don't really care either way.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get it right.
That's right.
So
I don't know if there is a right. I mean, I can tell you what I've pronounced it as for my whole life, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know if that's right or not. Maybe I've been mispronouncing it. I have no idea.
Yeah, what you pronounce it as your whole life is going to be what's right. I have a name that is often mispronounced. My name is December Wallaton. My whole complete name is December Rose Fatima Wallaton Njai. So I got a lot of mispronunciation opportunity there. So I just want to make sure that your name sounds right. Mr. Mennenga, we're going to get it. I am excited to hear from you. And I've read some about you called that. I don't know what questions that Dylan may have queued up, but I got a question. Why do they call you the internet's youth pastor? And why are you an aspiring theologian? Because it sounds like you're a theologian to me. You said you got a couple master's degrees from seminary. Sound like you there, brother. You there.
Well, the internet's youth pastor, I was actually just watching a video today about how football players, like NFL football players, like there's just not very good there's not good nicknames anymore in the NFL. There used to be really cool nicknames that NFL players had. So I was watching a video about this, and one of the things that was brought up in this video is you probably shouldn't try to self-proclaim your own nickname. And I'll be honest, the internet's youth pastor is a self-proclaimed nickname. And for whatever reason, it kind of has stuck for some people. Like some people really like it. And that really is totally self-proclaimed. There was one day where I was just thinking through, I'm like, what's a funny thing that I could call myself? And internet's youth pastor came up to mind, and I'm like, oh, what if I did that? That'd be kind of funny. And I guess it has stuck, even though you're not really supposed to make your own nickname. but it stuck. So that's how that happened. But yeah, I mean, so when I wrote my bio years and years ago, I probably should update it, but when I wrote it, I did put aspiring youth or aspiring theologian, and at the time I was still, I think, doing my Master of Divinity. So because I was like a student in one particular program, I thought maybe I wasn't allowed to call myself a theologian. But yeah, maybe at this point, with a couple master's degrees from seminary, maybe I should be able to call myself a theologian. I don't know. So
Yeah,
some people can be a little
right.
gatekeepy about that. Maybe I have to have a full PhD. I don't know. So
No,
anyway.
I do not have a PhD. And when Lee Barrett said you have obvious theological gifts, I was like, okay, dude, I'm a theologian now.
There you go. There you go. Well, and I'm under the impression that everybody's a theologian, even if you're an atheist. I think you're a theologian to some degree because you probably have thoughts about ultimate things and God and whatnot, even if you reject some of those things. So I think everybody's a theologian. So yeah, but I can imagine some people are like, if you're not getting paid to be a theologian, then are you a theologian? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's separate and apart from money altogether. So I think, yes, you have arrived as far as I'm concerned.
Great. I'll change my bio as soon as we're done with this then.
All right. So for those who don't follow Mason on social media, he has a tagline that is clever and funny, and I might juxtapose the actual order that they're in, but the meaning will be the same. Liberation theology in the streets, process theology in the sheets. And for those who don't know James Cone or Andrew North Whitehead, Mason, what are you talking about there?
Yes, what you talking about?
Yeah. So I am both very influenced by process theology and liberation theology. And I can definitely talk a little bit more about both of those theologies. But basically, liberation theology is all about liberation. It's pretty political. And so I thought it would be actually years ago, I saw somebody have some sort of joke in their Twitter bio. I mean, this was literally like over 10 years ago. I mean, long time ago. But somebody had a joke in their Twitter bio about something like something in the sheets, something in the streets, something in the sheets. I forget exactly what it was, but it was, some sort of joke like that. And I was like, that is hilarious. And and then one day I was thinking through, I'm like, what are the theologies I'm really influenced by? And then it like dawned on me, wait, like something kind of streets, with liberation theology being pretty political. And then process theology can kind of be known as being pretty woo-woo, which can be a little exciting. So that'd be kind of fun to describe that as in the sheets. So yeah, that's kind of how that came about. And so process theology is pretty woo-woo. Liberation theology can be pretty political. So I thought that's a good way to describe myself. Process or liberation theology in the streets, process theology in the sheets.
And for those who may not be too certain about what either one of those are, can you just give a little bit elaboration just on each one, just a little? Because I know we have a wide audience. We have some folks that are coming out of conservative, Christian churches to folks who are atheists. So
totally,
and they don't know really what either one of those entail. What would you say to them, like the elevator pitch of liberation theology versus process theology?
Yeah, so I think maybe a good way to describe liberation theology is theology that's done for and by people who are oppressed. And so there's lots of different kinds of systems of oppression and different kind of groupings of people who are oppressed. And so liberation theology is done by and for people who are oppressed. Maybe there's a way better way to describe liberation theology, but that's the first one that comes to mind for me. Process theology, my little elevator speech of process theology is typically that process theology emphasizes two things or focuses on two things. The first thing is that everything is in relationship with one another. So whether it's God and humans or humans and the natural world, or even something as small as electrons, everything is in relationship. And then the second thing I would say about process theology that it focuses on is that the future is open to all sorts of different kinds of possibilities, right? So a lot of us maybe grew up thinking that, the world has been preordained, like the future, everything that's going to happen in history has been already ordained by God. And we're basically just like living in this simulation, right? Process theology like says the opposite of that. Nothing has been determined. And so whatever happens in this moment and the next moment, in this moment, and this moment, and this moment, everything that's happening is totally open to all sorts of different kinds of possibilities. So those are the two things that process theology would really stress or focus on or emphasize.
And in
Yeah.
my mind, one is a what do you call it? Is a catalyst for the other, like in my mind. So to me, that process theology, that everything is determined moment by moment, minute by minute, and we get to decide, we have that choice. To me, that is a type of liberating theology to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Historically, I mean, if you want to get really nerdy and everything, historically, both of these traditions have not exactly interacted super much, even though they kind of emerged around the same time. But I'm one of those people that I'm like, I see so many connections between these two things. So I really love talking with folks that also see the kind of connections between process theology and liberation theology.
Yeah, and my intro to theology class with Lee Barrett, he designed a test, and it was you would go through and answer all these different questions, A, B, C, or D, and then you would add them all up to see where you landed. And we hadn't been taught what any of the things meant, but I landed with the most of my answers were liberation theology as my theological worldview, and then right behind that was process theology. So I answered those two things, and then the sort of Calvinistic, everybody's a sinner and burning in hell. I had very few of those answers because I had sort of deconstructed that.
Right.
And I just thought it was interesting that, well, that Lee was able to devise such a test, because the man is a genius. But without even knowing what process theology was or liberation theology was, recognizing that I was already thinking that way even before I went to seminary, to your point about everybody's a theologian at some point in their life. Before I even went to seminary, I was thinking that way and had no idea what any of it was called.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you bring up that point, because especially for process theology, and obviously I think this is the case for liberation theology more or less as well, but a lot of people who grew up very conservative evangelical like myself and then have maybe rejected that or left that world, many of them, if you ask them, what is it that you believe about God, or what is it that you believe about Jesus, or these kind of big theological questions, a lot of times, even if they're totally unaware of process theology and totally unaware with liberation theology, many of them start talking about God or Jesus or the world in ways that process theology or liberation theology would describe God, Jesus, and the world. So I do think these are theological traditions that are really, really, they have a lot of possibility for people who grew up in very conservative religious environments and maybe have rejected that world and are like, what is it that I do believe in the world? And I think this is where liberation theology and process theology have a lot of potential for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, and like with anything else, these thoughts and these concepts exist. The traditions of things usually predate the terminology of things.
Yes.
Because after a while, right, we gather up so many examples and so many samples, and then we collect those things and we give them a name, and then we start to call it that after the fact. You know what I'm saying? So, but the traditions, it predate the terminology. So people are engrossed or immersed in one or the other of those, or a combination of those, whether or not they believe in it or know it or not. You said something interesting where you said even atheists have a theology, and I love that, because I believe that. I believe atheists might get offended, and we have probably a good handful that eat the weekly digest of our show, and hopefully they're not offended. But I actually believe that there's no one who doesn't really believe in God. I know that sounds weird, but given the certain situation, people will certainly call on somebody, depending on what kind of circumstance they get put in. And what I really believe, and this is probably my bias as someone who does believe in God, what I really believe is they don't believe in the version or versions of God that they have been sold, or that have been shoved down their throat, or they have been marketed, or whatever the case. But I do believe that everyone has had some kind of divine experience, whether they want to call it God or not, call it coincidence, call it many coincidences, call it many coincidences lined up, call it serendipity, call it whatever you want. But many have had, to me, a divine experience. So whether they want to say it's a God or not is neither here nor there. Like I said, the traditions precede the terminology. You know what I'm saying? And the experiences precede the theology. So whatever you want to call it, I believe that there's not a human being that's breathing air in and out their lungs every day that has not had a God encounter of some kind, even if it's just meeting somebody. In my personal view, there's very few coincidences for me. Coincidences to me are God winks. Like, you mean to tell me in all the universe of all the millions of billions of people of all the times that you could have crossed paths with this person or had this thing happen? You know what I'm saying? But that's just me. That's just me. That's from a perspective of somebody who does believe in God. So, but I don't want to project that onto anyone, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I'll hear, somebody who would identify as an atheist, and they'll start talking about a really powerful experience in their life. And maybe it was an experience where they're sitting at the ocean and these ocean waves are coming in and they're just in this moment of awe. Or maybe they have this profound experience where they just fall madly in love with somebody. Or maybe it's an experience where they're at a one of their favorite musicians, and they just like are kind of entranced by this musician just like performing, whatever it might be. And I often think about like what is it that is happening in that experience, and what's animating that experience. And I would be the kind of person to say I think God is behind animating that experience. And I think in a lot of cases, I think there's a way to maybe describe God. I don't think the Christian tradition has always described God this way, but I think there is a way to, in the Christian tradition, to describe God as the thing that is in awe, that you're in awe of at the ocean, or the moment where you're falling madly in love, and that experience of love that you have with somebody, or that experience of just being like unbelievably fascinated by the talent of somebody. Whatever that experience is, like, that's God. I think there's a way to describe that as God. And so a lot of times, I think for a lot of atheists, I think there is a certain kind of definition of God that they're an atheist of. And I'm an atheist of many kind of definitions of God.
I
Right.
love that. So am
And
I.
so I think there's a definition of God that I think many of us are all atheists to, but I do think there might be ways of thinking about God that even most people that would identify as atheists are also like, well, maybe if that is God, like maybe I actually am a theist. Like maybe I do believe in that kind of God. So I think it really just comes down to how do we define God? And I think there's certainly definitions of God that I'm an atheist to. And I think there's even definitions of God that atheists might actually be a theist to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I reread Bruce Epperly's kind of intro text to Process Theology, the first chapter of that this morning, because it had been 8 years since I read it. And I was like, oh yeah, that really resonates with me so much more than the Calvinistic, Deus ex machina, clockmaker God of the Enlightenment era and all of that sort of thing. And God in all and all in God, that sort of panentheism that some process theologians believe in. And that makes so much more sense to me. Like December was saying, that little whisper. And one of the things that I like about process theology is they don't believe my sister had cancer this year, and they don't believe that God made that happen so that there could be some lesson there.
Right.
It's a thing that happened and it fucking sucked. But God wasn't like, now Dylan's sister needs to learn a very important spiritual lesson, and Dylan needs to learn a very important spiritual lesson. So now I'm going to make his sister very, very ill. And process theologians would be like, yeah, no, that's some garbage. and I love that about process theology. And, I love about liberation theology, the liberation part for the intersectionality of, different liberation theologians. And to me, that's how we live into the kingdom of God when the people are liberated.
Yeah.
And of course, for people who are like, name a liberation. Dr. Martin Luther King is probably one of the most famous 20th century liberation theologians in America. One of the fathers of the movement, I guess, recently passed away. Was it Gustavo Flores?
Gustavo Gutierrez just died.
Gutierrez. Yeah. Gustavo Gutierrez. The film about Oscar Romero is the one that we watched when we were studying liberation theology, and we read The Cross and the Lynching Tree by Dr. James Cone. And that just resonated so highly with me. But for the people that were more in the still remaining the Calvinistic worldview, they had problems with all of that for sure.
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought up this example or this sort of experience for you in your life of you said it was your sister who was diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah, just earlier this year.
So let's talk through how each one of these different theological traditions would respond to like a situation like that, where you have a loved one who is suffering from cancer, right? So the Calvinists would say, well, this is some sort of divine test of God to maybe either test your faith, or God has determined that this would happen, and it's a way for you to see if you're really truly faithful, right? So that's maybe how a Calvinist would interpret that experience of a loved one experiencing cancer. The process theologian would say that, and this is where maybe process theology gets a little bit like, ooh, is this heretical or not? Process theologians would say God is actually suffering alongside your sister with her cancer, right? God is experiencing that the suffering that she's experiencing, the cells that are being destroyed by the cancer in her body, God is experiencing that suffering at the same time. And so that's how process theology or a process theologian would maybe interpret that experience. And then the liberation theologian would say, they would maybe be aligned with the process theologian, but they would also say, hey, like, this is a fucked up situation. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but this is a fucked up situation. And like, what can we do to make this a better experience for everyone? And so like, let's try to figure out what is it about our healthcare system that we need to fix to make this a better experience for your sister? What is it about the kind of technology that we have that's available that we can make better so that your sister can maybe survive this cancer, right? So that's what the liberation theologian, like, that's their initial impulse is, how can we make this a better situation for not just your sister, but for everyone? And so that's how probably each one of these kind of theologians would respond to your particular situation with your sister being diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah, exactly.
And then see that the person may arrive at atheism having processed themselves through some version of their personal theology or what they've been trained, and come to the conclusion, well, there's no God, because the God that I have been taught, why would he do this? So
emphasis on he too, right?
Yes, definitely.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, right. And why would he? I don't understand why a God who is, this is their theology that's being broken down and dismantled in a moment of crisis, because people would say, I don't understand why God would allow this. I don't, or if they've been taught that God, if they're coming from some type of fundamentalist background that teaches, well, God did this to inflict for his glory. Like, I never understood that. God did what for his glory? What kind of narcissistic, lunatic, abusive God are we serving, that's inflicting people with cancer for his glory, or that's causing the death of somebody's child, having a stillbirth or some other defect or something, or a miscarriage for his glory? That's called shit happens. That's called it rains on the just like the unjust. That's called life. That's called the fragility and the fickleness of just being a human being operating the earth in a temporary body, in this destructible package that we have called flesh and bones. You know what I'm saying? What does God have to do that? But if you're coming from a certain type of theology and a certain type of religious tradition that teaches you God is in control of everything, and God has got it control, and God must have a reason, or this phrase that folks like to use that I don't know why they use, God must have had more need for them than what. God don't need nobody. From down here, he certainly don't need your 5-year-old daughter or your 3-year-old son or babies or your sister or brother, or my father died of cancer and my stepfather died of cancer. It just is. It just is.
Yeah.
But if you're coming from a religious tradition that suggests God is in control of everything, orchestrating everything, and we're just marionettes on this timeline, then you are going to have to come to the conclusion that God gave somebody cancer, or God gave somebody a terminal illness, or God caused a miscarriage, or God caused your husband to die in a car wreck for his glory, for a lesson, for no. And if you go through all that, you may come to the conclusion, because your pain, the tragedy of that may bring you to a place where you say, there's no God, there can't be a God.
Yeah.
Why would God do that? That will bring you to a crisis, a faith crisis. And many people are there, where they have gone through a tragedy and they cannot reconcile that tragedy with the divinity of God, that God caused that. Why would God cause me so much pain? And see, that God, I'm an atheist concerning that God. I love what you spoke earlier, saying we could apparently, I didn't know that I could be a selective atheist. I'm just finding out today that I identify as a selective atheist, y'all.
Yeah.
Because there's certain
Calvin's
gods I just don't believe in and can't fuck with. Okay.
Yeah, Calvin's God is a monster. And if that's what God is, then God can kiss my ass. And, you know, I have said that before, and I just said it again, because things like penal substitution atonement makes God a murderer. Things like a predestination means that I got spinal meningitis when I was 9 months old on purpose, and God only knows what that did to my brain and my family and all of that stuff. And, you know, all of those kind of tragic, traumatic things that goes with being a human being. Selective atheism. But Mason, I watched one of your videos today, and I deconstructed from fundamentalist Southern Baptist upbringing, mixed with the very conservative, very white Church of Christ. So my Church of Christ grandparents competed with my Baptist church people over my soul. I got baptized twice because, you know, because the Baptist baptism is for membership in the Baptist church, and the Church of Christ baptism is the right baptism, and they're the only ones in heaven for the remission of sins. And I kind of deconstructed all of that. And when I went to seminary, I got a really nice academic deconstruction of the fundamentalism that I grew up with and all of the associated fundamentalist fuckwittery that goes with that. And I run across people all the time, and I've had this question in my own mind. Why do you still believe? Why do you care about theology, Dylan, if you don't believe X, Y, and Z? How can you say you're a theologian if you don't believe X, Y, and Z? Well, go read the church history book and then come back to me. But why believe in anything? Why not just chuck it all if you deconstruct the way that you and I have? And I loved what you said about, the sacraments being cool as shit, because yeah, they are definitely cool as shit. But can you sort of explicate that for some people who may have that question, who are like wandering in the spiritual wilderness, like I did for well over a decade after I left fundamentalism, and was very angry because I learned that a lot of the stuff I was taught was not true. And I still struggle with this to this day. And I've written 3 books that are theological. I'm on a theological podcast. I'm on a theological radio show. And I'm still struggling with why believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, you're referencing one of my videos where I talk a little bit about why I'm still a Christian. And I remember one of my points was about the sacraments. And so, yeah, if you're interested in learning, you know, what at least I had to say at that moment about why I'm still a Christian, that's a good video. Here's maybe 2 different points I would say why I'm still a Christian, why I still care about any of this, that are maybe a little different than what I talk about in that video. So one of which is for the answer for the question, you know, how I want to answer why am I still a Christian? So there was a guy 2,000 years ago who we're about to celebrate his birthday, who was born in a barn in what is considered to be like kind of the most dreadful place in the Middle East that he could have been, anybody could have been born in. So,
Yeah.
think of the sort of and honestly, in some ways, like people would describe it as like the ghetto, or wherever, think of like the lowliest of places that people stereotype, right? That's where Jesus was born. He was born a brown man, was poor, and ended up eventually, he was so poor that he ended up even when he was working as a carpenter, he ended up starting his ministry and had no place to lay his head, right? Meaning that he didn't have a place that was home, right? So here's this guy who's wandering around the Middle East in Israel, and eventually his movement of love was gaining so much steam that the Roman Empire, the most powerful empire in the world, decided we can't have this guy continue to live anymore. So they kill him. And then 3 days later, despite all of the states attempt to kill this guy to end this movement, he ends up coming back, right? And then an entire movement continues in his name. That to me is like, whoever that guy is, that's an amazing story that I want to be a part of. I don't know like how much of that story is historically true. Almost all of it could be completely false. I do not care. All of it could be totally false. I do not care. That's a story that I want to be a part of. That's the story that I want to revolve my life around. Is this poor brown man who was born in the lowliest of places, who preaches a message of love, who is caring for the sick, who is touching people that weren't supposed to be touched, and healing people who weren't supposed to be healed, and caring and creating justice in the world that wasn't supposed to be just. He's doing all of this. And the Roman Empire, the most powerful empire of the world, that would be America today, kills this man, and he still is his message, his life, his story is still living on. And that's the story I want to be a part of. So that's one reason why I'm still a Christian. That's part of the reason why I still want to be a part of this. The second reason is similar to it, is what I love about the early church. And we see this right away in Acts. You start right away in Acts, and then literally the second chapter of Acts. The first thing that the followers of Jesus did, right as soon as Jesus ascends, right? So here again, who knows if any of this actually happened or not? But the first thing that the followers of Jesus do in response to this risen Christ is they start sharing everything they have in common. That's the first thing they start doing. That to me is like, that is, again, in conjunction with this guy named Jesus, that's the story I want to be a part of. Is not only this story of love and liberation that Jesus embodies, but also that his first followers decide to share everything they have in common. And to me, that is exactly why I still have hope for the church. There's a lot of reasons to not be hopeful that the church can mean anything in the world today. I understand why a lot of people have that kind of pessimism, but that's exactly the reason why I still have the hope, is that the very foundation of the first followers of Jesus was they shared everything they had in common. And to me, that gives me hope for what the church could be tomorrow, if we can make it happen tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, when people ask me why I'm a leftist, I'm like, have you read the words in red? Have you really thought through what it would look like politically to make the golden rule your rubric for political decision making? Would the love of neighbor the rubric for that for politics? And like you mentioned with the healthcare system, that liberation sort of idea of how can we make this better? What does the kingdom of God look like? I spent the first 3 decades of my life almost having rapture anxiety because of the stupid nonsense that we were taught. I went to see Mike Warnke in concert. I don't know if people, Google him. He's a piece of work. So that idea, and then the kingdom of God was everybody sharing everything that they had, as it says in Acts 2, and then later again in Acts 5. And when I said stuff like that to my now ex-wife, who was a Southern Baptist, She looked at me like I was from fucking outer space. And I was like, I'm literally quoting Jesus. I'm quoting the Bible. And when my fundamentalist, right-wing Republican people invite me to leave the country because I don't align with that anymore, and they look at me and like, where do you get this shit? And I'm like, from Jesus, the guy from the backwater of a backwater. We shouldn't know who this guy is.
Yeah.
Right. We should not
Yeah,
know
I grew up in
is.
South Dakota. Like, the Bethlehem of South Dakota would have been like some trailer park in Watertown, South Dakota, right? That, like, to me, that's like that. That's where this guy was born, and somehow he is the most famous, most powerful, or transformative person in the world. Just objective, like if you just look at it historically, even if you're an atheist, this guy 2,000 years ago, people are still talking about this guy. There's very few humans in history where 2,000 years later, people are still talking about you. Like that, and that's where this guy was born, in a trailer park or wherever, whatever kind of analogous place.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
this is where many Christians may fall out with me, and this is also why I don't call myself a Christian too. Well, one, because of what I've seen Christians doing, and I don't want the label because I don't believe that they represent Christ very well. For the first thing, and I understand folks who say, well, we're going to claim back the title or whatever they say. Do your best work. Do what you can. As far as me, I'm not trying to claim back anything. Christ didn't call himself a Christian, so I don't feel the need to call myself that. But I do call myself a follower of Christ for the same reason that you do. The man and his mission. But this is the part where Christians may fall out with me because, they believe one way, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, there's one way. I believe there are many ways, many pathways to salvation, to redemption, to God, to peace, to joy, to living a moral life. But the path of Christ, to me, it speaks the loudest in my life, in my soul, in my spirit. When I look at the life of this man and the legacy of this man, and I can pattern my life after him, and I can raise up my children in the admonition of this man's life, not necessarily the Bible. Let me just make a distinction there, because everything that's biblical, it ain't godly. They use the Bible for a whole lot of stuff, for snatching up your daughters, for raping folks, for taking slaves, for all kind of stuff. Okay, so everything that's biblical ain't godly, but the pattern of Christ's life, that man and that mission. Everyone, there's prophets, there's every religion has their prophet or their leader or their messenger, but this is the messenger and the message that speaks the loudest to me, that I identify the most with, that enlightens, that makes my baby leap, as we like to say in the church, that stirs me up the most. But the thing about some Christians, a lot of Christians, is they believe that if you don't believe in this one way and this one path and this one road, you go into hell. I just don't believe that. That's another reason why I don't call myself Christian. I don't believe that. I believe before we had the names that we have given God, the names that we have given his son, that we found in this scroll or whatever the case is, that person had a name, had a life, had an existence before we put a name to it, before we canonized a Bible and put scriptures to it. Morality didn't just start to exist when the King James version of the Bible broke off on the scene. You know what I'm saying? Living right, sharing what you have in common, treating your neighbor like yourself, loving people, doing right, doing justice, feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, sheltering folks. That didn't come along just because someone canonized some scrolls and slapped the title on it and called it the Bible, and what version, the King James version. You know what I'm saying? Those things existed, as we said earlier. These things predate the terminology, the terms, and the Bibles and the technology. They predate all of that. Everything that's divine predates whatever man has done with it since it became so. And so that's why Jesus speaks the loudest to me, the life and the legacy. He's not the only way, but he's the way that I have chosen. He's not the only prophet, but he's the prophet that I have chosen. The thing is, the hubris of Christianity is to say that this is the only way, and this is the only prophet, and this is the only voice. That is the hubris of Christianity that I cannot get with, because how dare you tell somebody else that something that they have read has not enlightened and empowered and encouraged them? How dare you tell somebody else that whatever their prophet is has not led them out of a dark place or caused them to lead an admirable, productive, moral life? How dare you cast down other people's religions and faiths, especially indigenous or culturally sacred, because Christians love to do that. They love to call something demonic that they don't understand. If it ain't like what it's demonic, fool, you wouldn't see a demon if it rolled up on you. Okay,
Right.
anything that looks
just
different.
elected one.
Sometimes they might vote him for president too.
Exactly.
Come on through here. Okay, did okay, because what you said something earlier when you were talking about Christ, you said you saw what he did, what the people did that followed him. They shared all things that they have in common. Whatever your leader encourages you, inspires you, empowers you to do, that is the heart of that leader. We can't get through an episode without talking about Donald Trump, so we're going to talk about him right here, right quick. Whatever that leader inspires you to do, whatever that leader empowers, encourages you, whatever that leader affirms in you, that is the heart of that leader. And when you look at the folks that follow Donald Trump, and he affirms, inspires, encourages, and empowers hate, discrimination, racism, homophobic policies and positions, you know what I'm saying? Xenophobia, misogynistic. The people that are following him speak to what kind of leader it is. That's my personal opinion. Your followers speak to what kind of leadership you are and what kind of leader you are and what kind of legacy that you are building. And if the people who are following you, I will not say that everybody who voted for Trump is a racist or misogynist or is homophobic or xenophobic. What I will say is that everyone who is racist, homophobic, misogynistic, or any of those things did vote for Trump. That's what I will say. And why did they do that? Because he's their leader and he speaks to them and he affirms their hate and he encourages their fear and he empowers their lowest self that says, I'm better than them. I'm chosen. I'm called. I'm appointed. America is God's country. Every piece of this planet is God's. Every person on the planet is made in the image of God. Even the ones you don't like, even the ones that show up to the border unannounced and ask, for asylum, even the children that were born here too, undocumented immigrants. Everyone is made in the image of God. And the problem with a lot of Christians and especially many of the ones that follow Christ is they do not believe that. They don't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't
by your
look
fruit
at
you
this
will be
person
known
and see God. They look at themselves and see God, especially if they're white and male, but they can't see God in other people. And that's not a God and a label I could get behind. That's where the selective atheism comes in. Me and those people don't serve the same God, but they call themselves Christians. Me and those people don't know the same Jesus, but they use Jesus' name. Me and those people don't have the same mission, but they claim they do, but their policies out them. You know, y'all ever watch Maury Povich show, Jerry Springer show, all those shows, and now they would come in with the DNA results and they would say the tests are in, the results are, you are not the father, or you and that's what I think of when I think of Donald Trump, and I think of a lot of his followers. God, the God that I serve, he is not your father. The Jesus that I know, he is not your Messiah. He is not your savior. As a matter of fact, the one that you voted for, that's your father. That's your savior. And I ain't gonna send nobody to hell because I ain't got no hell or heaven to put nobody in. But I have an idea of who his father is by what he does, what he says, how he acts, and what he encourages, empowers, and inspires people to do in his name. Remember, they do it in Trump's name, not in God's name.
Mm-hmm. Are you a preacher? You should be a preacher if you're not.
I pastored for 10 years.
Okay, I was about to say you need to be a preacher if you're not.
Yeah,
I did pastor.
She takes
for
us
a
to
while,
church on the regular.
I pastored for a while.
My goodness, I don't have to go to church on Sunday now. I felt like that's all I need. You just need an offering plate to go through right now. This is great.
Yeah.
Wait,
So-
one thing I really like
Go ahead.
what you brought up there, December, is basically, you know, the fruits of a leader or sorry, the fruits of the followers really show off or show the fruit of the leader, right?
Yeah.
Or
The
who that
leader's the
leader really
tree.
is,
His
right?
followers are the fruit,
Right.
and that tree
And
is
so,
rotten.
and what I love about that, especially, when, Dylan, you ask kind of the question, like, why am I still a Christian? And I often think, okay, like I can kind of give the answer around why I think I'm still a Christian. At the end of the day, I often get asked the question, are you a Christian? Or some people just accuse me of not being a Christian. But I
Right.
often think that's not even for me to decide. For
Right.
me, the person who gets to answer whether or not I'm a Christian is the person experiencing homelessness that I saw on the street today. That's the person that gets to decide whether or not I'm a Christian today. Or, the person who's the least of these, that's the person who gets to decide if I'm a Christian,
Yes.
right? And so whenever I think of that question of, are you a Christian, or somebody accuses you not to be a Christian, I often think that's not for them or anyone to decide, other than the least of these. The least of these gets to decide whether or not you were a Christian today.
Yeah.
The fruit will tell
That's
on
a
you.
brilliant point.
The fruit don't lie.
Yeah, because they're the ones experiencing you in that moment. And my LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, family members, etc., do not feel that Christian Christ-like love from MAGA world or from New Wanu Baptist Church, where I got indoctrinated to hate gay people in the early 90s because Southern Baptist and all that. So we're in a precarious time in this country. Again, it's been more precarious for people of color and marginalized groups in the past, but now it's ramping up again. So I personally struggle right now with grace for people like Pete Hegseth or Donald Trump, or the guy that he is tapping to be the energy secretary, who believes that global climate change has a lot of good benefits to it. People like that, I really struggle finding grace in my heart, because my compassion fatigue is maxed out, because I'm concerned about my transgender family member, or I'm concerned about my podcast co-host who is a Black woman in America, or I'm concerned about myself because I'm a disabled person in America, or so and finding hope in the ways that evangelicals with their evangelical platitudes would say in a time of crisis. God won't give you more than you can bear, that kind of foolishness. I'm struggling right now with all that. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder for you two, like, where are you finding hope, and where are you finding the capacity for grace for somebody like Mitch McConnell that I'd just as soon throat punch, even though I'm a pacifist, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, for me, the first thing that comes up in my mind is Jesus doesn't say that we shouldn't have enemies. He just says we should love our enemies, right? So you will have enemies, right? So that could be a Mitch McConnell, that can be a Donald Trump, that can be a Pete Hegseth, or the list goes on and on. Right?
He also says, "Be angry, but sin not." So, you know what I'm saying? So that means God knows you're gonna get pissed off around here.
Exactly. So you will have enemies, right? And so the trick is, how do you love your enemy, right? I don't think loving your enemy is ignoring their sin. I certainly don't think that that's what Jesus is getting at by loving our enemy. So I think it's very, very important for us to call out the sins that we see from our enemies, whether it's a Pete Hegseth or a Donald Trump or whoever it might be. I think it's really important for us to call that out. And that's something that I try to do in lots of, avenues of my life. But that's something that's important for us to call out that sin. The other thing in terms of that grace part, right, that you were talking about, is I think it's important for us to, again, call out the sin. And I think that's an act of loving our enemy. The other act of loving our enemy is recognizing that there is a possibility they can change, right? Again, I'm a process theologian. Anything is possible. A Pete Hegseth or Donald Trump could actually repent and be transformed. I think that's a real possibility. It might not seem very real right now, but it is a thing that could happen. And when that does, I think, or if that does happen, that kind of transformation, I think we need to be willing to say, welcome. You are a part of this, right? Because the reason why I bring that up is I used to be, now obviously I didn't have the kind of power that Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth had, but I used to ideologically be exactly like them. 100%. I was fully bought in the same bullshit that they were bought into. And the Spirit of God changed me. And so if I could change, anyone can change, right? And so that's the kind of hope that I have, is that if I, as Mason Mennenga, the most conservative teenage kid that there could have ever been, if I could change, anyone can change. Donald Trump could change. Pete Hegseth could change. Anyone can change. And so that's where I have my hope, is anyone can change. And yet we should still call out the people, especially the people who have a lot of power. We should call out those enemies because I think that's an act of love. So I think all of those things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, I came from a similar place. I, used to tell the kids in the youth group that I was part of, the leadership of, that all the Buddhists and all the Muslims and all the Jews and all the people who don't confirm Jesus as Lord and Savior are going to hell forever and ever. And I voted, straight ticket Republican and held all of the views. And by God's grace, I did change. And sometimes I lose the fact that I did. And there's a prayer for Donald Trump in one of my books where I pray that he gets so smacked by grace that he just stands up and tells the whole country, wow, I was doing it all wrong. And here's how I'm going to make recompense and, devote my life to service, And yet,
I'm holding my breath, but it could happen.
Yeah.
I'm not holding my breath.
Take a miracle.
You're right.
Right. It would take a miracle. And that's, I guess I don't give them the credit because I haven't seen any evidence. And so, yeah, I want to be more gracious and create more peace than they want to allow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tough place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a tough place to be.
That's a deep thing to say. You said, I want to be more gracious. I want to create more peace than they will allow. And that reminds me exactly of the story of Christ, right? Because he wanted to be more gracious than the church could contend with and the church could tolerate. And he wanted to create more peace than the government wanted to allow. How do we know that? Because the government brought out Barabbas and him and said, well, which one? We gonna kill somebody. You know what I'm saying? Which one y'all? And they chose the other, and they chose for Christ to be crucified because he wanted to be more gracious and he wanted to be more peaceful than anyone wanted to allow at the time. And that is because, peace and grace don't pay the bills. Peace and grace don't lend itself to power. Like you're saying now, there's a lot of churches that are not teaching the red letters of the Bible. You present them with some, they'll say, where did you get that? Where'd you get? Well, I got that straight out the Bible. Well, that's weak. That's weak. There's a lot of pastors right now, they're not preaching the actual teachings of Christ because they can't afford to, because the church will not allow them to be as gracious and peaceful as they would allow. The church that they're pastoring will not allow them to say how the immigrant should be treated, what Christ said. The church will not allow them to say how the drug addict should be treated, how the single mother should be treated. And that's unfortunate. But what you said to me sounds just like the life of Christ. And also, while you all were talking, I was thinking of a situation in the Bible, and I looked it up, that is in Mark. It's in multiple of the Gospels, but the one I'll use is Mark chapter 11. And you might know of this one, and that is where Jesus passed a fig tree, and it had leaves, and he reached to see did it have fruit, and it didn't have fruit, and he cursed the tree. And they're like, what's going on? The tree it reminds me of this modern time now, with especially the evangelicals, which is they have the appearance of fruitfulness. They have the appearance of godliness, but deny its power. They have the appearance that Christ is their savior and their master and their leader and their guide. But he is neither their savior, their master, their leader, nor their God, because they're not led by his words nor by his example. And it reminds me of that fig tree that Jesus walked by that appeared to be fruitful, but had no fruit on it. It was just looking good, y'all. And a lot of these organizations, a lot of these ministries, oh, they look good. Oh, they sound good. Oh, they talk a good game. But Jesus is a mascot. He's definitely not their quarterback. And he's definitely not the coach. He's just a mascot. He's just the one they used to hype the crowd up. He's just the one that used to get everybody involved. He's just the one running up and down the field that they got coming out of their mouths, making a mockery of the real gospel, the love of God, the life of Christ, the legacy of Christ. And you can tell that by their policies. Their policies tell you what their position is, and who they get behind tells you where their heart is. And no, and let me pause right here and say, no, the Democrats don't have it all together. And no, they're not all right either. And no, they're not exempt from some of the same back dealings with corporations and billionaires. Nobody's exempt from that in politics, period. So I am not saying, I'm not getting on here. I want to make sure that you hear me clearly, that I'm not saying, oh, if you voted for Trump, you voted for the devil and you should have voted for no. What I am saying is, call a spade, though. What we're not going to do is ignore what we have seen and what we have heard. And what we cannot do is ignore the policies and the laws and the things that are happening in the courts, and the children that are dying in the schools, and the children that have been separated from their parents and have been orphanized by the United States government, still haven't been reunited with their parents. What we're not going to do is ignore the fruit from this tree. We cannot. And the church that has gotten behind it, that has saw fit to water it and to fertilize it and to care for it and to see that it flourish. And they say in the name of Jesus, but Jesus don't have nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, I think about Matt had mentioned earlier a theologian, the grieving God. I'm trying to think of, Matt mentioned him earlier. Yes, Maltman. Yes, and I think about earlier when you were saying that, depending on what theology, that God, with the cancer diagnosis, that God is there. He's there with you during the chemotherapy, and he's there with you during the hospital visits, and he's there with you during when you get that diagnosis and your heart breaks, and he's there with you in your last moments and you're taking your last breath, and he's there with you where you're holding your wife's hand or your child's hand, or he's there with you when you've had a miscarriage or you've lost a child, or you're trying to carry and for some reason the fertility treatments aren't working, and he's there suffering with you. As a matter of fact, Psalm says that God is with the brokenhearted. And I have to believe that God is standing there at the border crying with the child that has been orphanized, that God is standing there in the fertility clinic holding the hand of the 14-year-old girl who was raped by her uncle or her father, who believes in God but doesn't believe that she should have to carry her brother, cousin, nephew. You know what I'm saying? I have to believe that God is with the folk, the transgender or intersex or whatever the case is in those communities who are experiencing whatever they're experiencing and want to identify in peace, however they want to identify. But the world will not just let them exist and be as they are. They're not doing any harm to anyone. They're not trying to get anyone to do what they're doing. They're not breaking any laws. They're not abusing anyone, but the world will just not let them be. And I have to believe that God is standing with that one, not with the one that's demonizing them, that wants to send them, that wants them dead, or doesn't want them to receive health care, or doesn't want them to have a better life and be free from an oppressive regime wherever they come from. I have to believe that the God that I serve stands on with those folks. And you can't ignore the policies and the positions of people, regardless of what side of the political spectrum they come from. Watch their actions. Forget what they talking about, because talk is cheap. Watch what these folks do. That's going to tell you who they are at the end of the day. Trump talked a lot of shit. Oh, he talked a lot of shit. And I talked a lot of shit about him. But the truth is, apparently a good portion of this country thinks that he's a better leader. But you know what? We're going to find out. As a matter of fact, I happen to believe we're going to fuck around and find out.
Yeah, we
People
already
voted for
have.
him because they wanted cheaper eggs, and then he wants to raise tariffs on Mexico. Do you know how much import we get from Mexico? People voted for him because they want a tighter border. Nothing wrong with that. They want to send folks out of the country. Nothing wrong with that if they're here illegally. But do you know who's picking all our fruits and vegetables? I promise you, it ain't Dylan, it ain't December, it ain't Mason. And it ain't most palm colored people. We don't want those jobs. There's a reason why those jobs are filled with certain people, because they accept less. They accept less money. They accept less standards. They accept less safety. They don't get maternity leave. They don't get paid vacation. They accept less than we would accept, because they have reason to accept less than we would accept. It's more than they would get from where they come from. Watch the price of gas go up. Watch the price of groceries go up. Watch these things happen. Even folks who are in mixed status families have, if you let Trump tell it, it's not humane to separate. So send the whole family back. What? Why didn't he say that while he was running for office? He waited till after he got elected to say that. Notice He didn't say that while he was running. Send the whole family back. He didn't say, now one of his guys did, but he didn't say that. Now he gets on a prime time interview and says, you're right. We shouldn't separate the families. The way to solve that is to send the whole family back. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have got so many Hispanic votes if he would have said that. You talking about mixed status families, send the whole family back? No, that don't work. But people say what they got to say to get where they got to get to. But watch the fruit, because the fruit tell the truth. The fruit ain't going to lie about what the tree is.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation with Mason. And before I let everybody go, I do want to leave you with the word on the street. And the word on the street from this week comes from Luke chapter 1, 46 through 55, known as the Magnificat, or as I called it last night on John Fugelsang's show, Mary doing the woke shit. So here it is. This is the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowly state of his servant. Surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. Indeed, his mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from the thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has come to the aid of his child Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and his descendants forever. And she's saying that because she is carrying the one we call the Prince of Peace, the illiterate peasant from the backwater of a backwater, who we still know today and still hope for him to come again. Mason, where can our listeners find you on the internet and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I've got a website, masonmennenga.com. So it's just my name. And if you ever Google my name and you're like, is this the right Mason Mennenga? There's two of us in the world, and the other one is not on the internet at all. So if you're finding a Mason Mennenga on the internet, more than likely it's me, unfortunately. So, but yeah, masonmennenga.com. You can find all the links for all the things that I'm up to. I'm pretty active on Twitter and Threads and Blue Sky and YouTube and Instagram and all the things. I'm pretty online. And then I also have my own theology podcast as well called A People's Theology. So if you like these kind of conversations, I do these kind of conversations on my own theology podcast. So check it out if you're interested.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much for joining us. December, do you have any last words?
My last word is thank you, Mason. Mason Mennenga. I'm going to get your name right.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for the light, the life, the salt, and the sugar, and the seasoning that you are in the earth. And I love that you joined us today, and I hope that you come back. And I hope that our listeners enjoyed this conversation. We had almost a mini Bible study, a service today, which we do. Sometimes the service just sprinkled with a little bit of hot sauce. It's a little curse word here and there. That never hurt nobody. We ain't cursing, folks. We just using spicy language. You know what I'm saying? And so
That's right.
thank you for joining us. We hope you come back. And y'all listen, go to his website. download his podcast, check him out. The man is awesome. Y'all seen it. You know what I'm saying? So support the brother. He's only one of two in the world. Apparently, God desired for him to have attention. He's the only one on the internet.
Yeah, and he's absolutely hilarious, y'all. I mean, he is hilarious and quite clever with his hilarity. So if you need a good theological joke, Mason's your guy.
Got you.
That's right. Thank y'all for tuning in. Listen, next week, for those of you who are with us every week, will be our last episode until the new year. Okay, so I want to put that out there. We will be taking the day after Christmas off. Hopefully you will enjoy that with your family, but we'll be right back here next week, same bad time, same bad channel. And after that, we'll see y'all in January. Like people say where I'm from, we'll see y'all in January.
All right. That's the show. Good night, everybody.